At the beginning, there's no panic, no urgency, no sudden realization that something meaningful has slipped away. Instead, there's a quiet sense of control, or at least the illusion of it. They tell themselves a story that feels comfortable, familiar, and safe. Nothing has really changed. That's the first thought, because in their experience, distance has always been part of the dynamic. Silence has never meant the end. It's just been another phase. And deep down, they've grown used to the idea that no matter how far they pull away, you'll still be there when they return. So when your energy shifts, when you stop reaching out, when you stop trying to hold the connection together, they don't immediately see it for what it is. They assume it's temporary. They assume you're just taking space. They assume that eventually, like every other time, you'll come back. And that assumption gives them a sense of control. It allows them to stay where they are, emotionally distant, detached, and unbothered on the surface. Because as long as they believe they still have access to you, there's no need to confront anything deeper. This is where denial quietly takes its place, not loud, not obvious, but subtle and persistent. It shows up in the way they minimize the situation, in the way they avoid thinking too deeply about your absence, in the way they distract themselves with other things, convincing themselves that everything is still within their reach. They might notice that you're not texting like before. They might realize that your presence feels different. But instead of questioning it, instead of leaning into that discomfort, they brush it aside with thoughts like, they just need time, or I'll talk to them later. Because facing the possibility that you're actually letting go, that would require them to feel something they've spent a long time avoiding. So they don't go there. They stay in the illusion. And the illusion says, I still have time to reach out later, time to fix things when it feels convenient, time to return when they feel ready. But what they don't realize in this stage is that something has already changed, and it's not on your side, it's within the connection itself. Because for the first time, you're not waiting. You're not holding the space the way you used to. You're not filling in the silence with hope, effort, or emotional availability, and that's unfamiliar to them, but they don't fully register it yet. They're still operating from old patterns from past experiences where distance didn't mean loss, where pulling away didn't have consequences, where they could take their time and still come back to something that was intact. So they remain calm, almost too calm. There's no urgency in their actions, no immediate desire to check in or understand what's happening, because in their mind, there's nothing to lose. Not yet. They might even feel a sense of relief in the quiet. Less pressure, less emotional demand. It feels easier this way. No expectations, no need to respond, no need to engage deeply. And that comfort reinforces the illusion. It convinces them that everything is fine, that the connection is still there, just paused, waiting for them whenever they decide to return. But here's the truth, they're not ready to face. The absence of noise doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means something is ending quietly. And while they sit in that comfort, while they tell themselves they still have time, something important is happening beyond their awareness. You're detaching, not in anger, not in reaction, but in clarity. You're no longer trying to hold on to something that isn't being held from both sides. You're no longer chasing a connection that only exists when you keep it alive. And that shift is silent but powerful because it removes the one thing they've always relied on without realizing it, your consistency. But in this stage, they don't see it. They're still looking at the situation through the lens of control, not loss. They believe the door is still open. They believe they can walk back in whenever they choose. And that belief keeps them still. It keeps them passive. It keeps them from realizing that while they're taking their time is quietly taking something away from them. Because the moment you stop waiting is the moment the dynamic changes. And the moment they realize that it won't feel like control anymore. And then, slowly, almost quietly, something begins to feel different. It's not loud. There's no dramatic moment, no clear turning point where everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, it creeps in subtly, like a feeling they can't quite explain, but can't ignore either. At first, it's just a thought in the background, a small shift in awareness. Something feels off. They might notice that your name doesn't show up on their phone the way it used to. The pervichness of your presence, the messages, the reactions, the effort, it's not there anymore. And while they've been used to distance before, this kind of silence feels different. It's unfamiliar because before, even in the distance, there was always a thread connecting you to them. You were still reaching out, still responding, still showing in some way that you were there. But now that thread feels thinner, less certain. And for the first time, they start to feel it, not fully understand it, but feel it. They might check your profile more often than they realize, notice the absence of your attention, wonder, even if just for a second, why things seem quieter than usual. But instead of confronting that feeling directly, they try to make sense of it in ways that keep them comfortable. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they just need space. Maybe I am overthinking it, because fully accepting that something has shifted would mean stepping into uncertainty. And uncertainty is something they've always tried to avoid. So they stay in this in-between state, aware but not fully, curious but not ready to face the truth. And that's where the tension begins to build. Because even though they're not admitting it to themselves, something inside them is starting to notice the absence, starting to register that your energy, the way you showed up, the way you held the connection, is no longer the same. And that absence creates a quiet discomfort. It's not overwhelming yet. It doesn't stop them in their tracks, but it lingers. It shows up in small moments, when they expect a message that doesn't come, when they think about reaching out but hesitate, when they realize they haven't heard from you in a way that used to feel normal. And for the first time, there's a question forming beneath the surface. Why does this feel different? But instead of answering it, they sit with it. They distract themselves. Stay busy. Focus on other things. Because that's what they've always done when something emotional starts to rise, redirect, avoid, minimize. But the difference now is that the feeling doesn't go away as easily. Because this isn't just distance anymore. This is change. And even though they haven't fully accepted it, even though they're still trying to convince themselves that everything is under control, their awareness is starting to shift. They begin to sense that you're no longer waiting in the same way, that your energy isn't reaching for them anymore, that something about your presence or your absence carries a different kin, of meaning. And that realization, even in its early stages, creates unease because now there's a crack in the illusion they were holding on to. The belief that they had all the time in the world, that they could come back whenever they wanted, it starts to feel a little less certain, not completely gone, but weakened. And that uncertainty is unfamiliar territory because for so long they've relied on predictability in this dynamic, on the idea that no matter how much space they created, the connection would still be there, waiting for them. But now they're not so sure. And that not so sure feeling is where everything begins to shift internally. They don't act on it yet. They don't reach out immediately or suddenly change their behavior, but they feel it, that quiet realization that something isn't the same anymore, that the dynamic they were comfortable in might not exist in the same way now. And even if they can't fully explain it, even if they're still trying to make sense of it in ways that protect them from deeper emotion, the awareness is there, growing, expanding, becoming harder to ignore. Because when someone who was once consistent in your life becomes distant in a new way, not reactive, not emotional, just gone in a quiet, steady sense, it creates a different kind of impact. One that doesn't demand attention, but slowly captures it. And that's where they are now. Not fully aware, not fully understanding, but no longer completely comfortable in the illusion they once had because something feels different. And deep down, they know it. And then, that quiet awareness, it starts to turn into something they can't ignore anymore. At first, it was just a subtle feeling, a small shift, something they could brush off or explain away. But now, it lingers longer. It follows them into moments of silence. It shows up when there's nothing left to distract them. And what was once easy to avoid starts becoming harder to escape. They begin to feel a kind of discomfort they're not used to sitting with. Not because they've never felt emotions before, But because this one doesn't fade the way others did, it stays, it repeats. It grows quietly in the background. There's a restlessness that begins to build. They might not have the words for it. They might not even fully understand where it's coming from, but they feel it in the way their mind keeps circling back to you, in the way your absence feels heavier than it should, in the way things that once felt normal now feel incomplete. And this is new territory for them, because usually when something becomes emotionally uncomfortable, they know how to handle it. They create distance. They shift their focus. They disconnect just enough to regain control. But this time, distance isn't fixing it, because the distance is already there. And instead of bringing relief, it's starting to feel like something is missing. They might try to distract themselves the same way they always have, keeping busy, engaging in other conversations, filling their time with anything that prevents them from sitting too long with their thoughts. But no matter what they do, there are moments where everything slows down and that feeling comes back, stronger, clearer, more present. They start to notice how often their mind drifts back to you without permission. A memory, a conversation, a small detail that suddenly feels more significant than it did before. And instead of pushing it away easily, they find themselves sitting in it for a little longer. And that's where the discomfort deepens. Because now it's not just about noticing your absence, it's about feeling it, really feeling it. They begin to question things they didn't question before. Why does it feel this quiet? Why does something seem off, even when everything else is the same? Why does your absence feel different this time? And those questions don't come with easy answers, because answering them honestly would require them to face something they've spent a long time avoiding: the emotional weight of the connection they had with you. So instead, they stay in that in-between space, aware enough to feel something is wrong, but not ready to fully confront what it means. And that creates tension inside them, because one part of them wants to understand what's happening, wants to reach out, wants to break the silence and bring things back to what they were. But another part holds them back, tells them to wait, tells them not to act too quickly, tells them to stay in control. So they hesitate. They think about messaging you, but don't. They consider checking in, but stop themselves, because taking action would mean acknowledging that something has shifted. And that shift matters. And that's what they're not fully ready to accept yet. But the feeling doesn't go away. It builds, slowly, quietly, but steadily, until it starts affecting the way they experience everything else. Things that once felt normal now feel slightly off. Conversations with others don't carry the same weight. Moments that used to distract them don't fully hold their attention. There's a subtle sense of something missing, and they can't replace it as easily as they thought they could. And that's when it starts to hit them on a deeper level. Not all at once, not in a dramatic realization, but in fragments, in moments where they feel the absence more clearly than before. In pauses where they realize they've been thinking about you longer than they intended to. In quiet spaces where there's nothing left to distract them from what's slowly surfacing inside. And what's surfacing is emotion, unprocessed, unacknowledged, but real, because for the first time, the distance they once relied on to feel safe is no longer protecting them. It's confronting them. It's showing them what it feels like when something that mattered is no longer within reach in the same way. And that discomfort, that unfamiliar emotional weight they can't quite explain or escape, is the beginning of something deeper, because now they're not just noticing the change. They're starting to feel the impact of it. And then, at some point, the truth stops arriving in fragments and lands all at once. There's no more explaining it away. No more distraction strong enough to keep it buried. No more comfort in the idea that everything is still within reach, because now the silence has stretched long enough, deep enough to say something they can't ignore anymore. You're not coming back the way you used to. And that realization doesn't come loudly. It comes heavy. It settles in their chest in a way that feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling. Because up until now, there was always a sense of possibility. Even in the distance, even in the confusion, there was always this underlying belief that the connection was still there, waiting, paused, not gone. But now, It doesn't feel paused anymore. It feels different. It feels like something has actually shifted beyond their control. They might pick up their phone and scroll almost instinctively, expecting to see something from you, and there's nothing. Not just silence, but a silence that feels intentional, a silence that doesn't ask for a response, a silence that doesn't leave the door open in the same way. And that's when it starts to sink in. You didn't just step back, you let go. And that's a realization they weren't prepared for. Because in their mind, you were always going to be there in some form. Maybe not constantly, maybe not graphically, but enough. Enough to return to, enough to reconnect with whenever they felt ready. But now, for the first time, that certainty is gone. And what replaces it is the weight of loss. Not imagined, not temporary, but real. They begin to replay things differently in their mind. Moments that once felt casual now feel significant. Conversations they didn't think much about suddenly carry meaning. Your presence, something they once experienced without fully recognizing its value, now stands out in its absence. And it's not just about missing you. It's about realizing what you were to them. Because when something is always there, it's easy to overlook its importance. Easy to assume it will remain, regardless of how you show up. But when it's gone, truly gone, in the way that doesn't ask, doesn't chase, doesn't wait, it forces a different kind of awareness, the kind they've been avoiding. They start to feel the silence, the way you once did. They feel the absence without explanation. They feel the distance without reassurance. And in that space, something shifts inside them because now they're no longer in control of the connection. They're experiencing it from the other side, the side where you don't know if you should reach out, the side where you wonder if it's too late, the side where the silence feels louder than any words ever could. And that's where the emotional impact deepens, because it's no longer just discomfort, it's realization, a quiet, undeniable understanding that something meaningful has slipped through their hands, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, through moments they didn't fully show up for, through distance they thought had no consequence, through time they believed they always had. And now, time feels different. It doesn't feel like something they can take. It feels like something that's already taken something from them. They might sit with this realization in ways they don't show outwardly. On the surface, they may still appear composed, still appear controlled, but internally, there's a shift happening, a kind of awareness that wasn't there before. Because now, they're not just thinking about you, they're feeling the absence of what you were, the consistency, the effort, the presence they once moved around freely without fully realizing it was holding something together. And now that it's gone, they see it. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to feel it. Enough to know that this isn't just another phase. This isn't just distance that will naturally close again. This is something they might not be able to return to in the same way. And that thought, that quiet, unsettling possibility is what changes everything. Because for the first time, they're not questioning if you'll come back. They're questioning if they've already lost you.